She had feared the ocean, yet she crossed it again and again, more times than most sailors dared. Born small and unwanted by convents, she became a mother to thousands across 3 continents. Her name was Saint Frances Xavier Cabrini, the tiny woman whose faith turned rejection into mission. Welcome to Daily Saints with Grace. Fast, faithful stories told with clarity and heart. Before we begin, type Amen in the comments, like the video, and subscribe so more souls could hear this story. Today we remember how a fragile teacher from Lombardy became the patron of immigrants, how a fear of water met a larger obedience, and how love learned to travel farther than ships. If you ever felt too small for a big calling, this life had answered you already. Walk with me. Italy had just stitched itself under one flag, but hunger still leaned on doorways and work came slow. Factories were new, fields were tired, and ships to the Americas kept filling with families who chased bread and hope. Amid that restlessness, the church rekindled her missionary fire. New congregations rose, the Sacred Heart devotion spread, and pulpits called people to mercy that moved its feet. On July 15, 1850, in Sant'Angelo Lodigiano, a fragile child drew shallow breaths while midwives worried. They named her Francesca Cabrini. Her mother wrapped her like an ember. Her father wrapped nights in stories of far-off missions and storm-torn decks. Weakness became her classroom. Prayer became her air. Each evening the family knelt before a small image of the Sacred Heart. She learned that holiness often began with sweeping, nursing, teaching, ordinary duties offered with extravagant love. And by the river, the child practiced a secret litany. She dropped wildflowers on the current and whispered, "This one is for a soul who does not yet know you." Those petals sailed ahead of her life like tiny passports. Her vocation had already started traveling. Her world had been poor, unified, unsettled, and perfectly designed to test a small courage. What started as a private ache to belong entirely to God soon looked like a map. Next came classrooms, discipline, and the first closed door that would redirect everything. At 13, she entered the convent school in Arzago/Arona, a quiet place where bells trimmed the day and discipline shaped the hours. She learned grammar and numbers, but more than that she learned silence, steadiness, and how small tasks turned into prayer when offered cleanly. Teachers noticed the way she listened. Eyes bright, hands careful, heart already leaning toward a promise. She graduated with distinction and earned a teaching certificate, rare for a village girl. Back home, her classroom held rough benches and hungry faces. She began each lesson with a simple prayer and let patience preach the rest. She taught letters and mercy together, as if the alphabet itself needed charity to make sense. At 18, convinced God wanted all of her, she knocked at a convent door, the Daughters of the Sacred Heart, and the answer came soft and severe. "No, your health is too fragile." The refusal pierced, and for a few days she wept in quiet corners. But grief turned into a different kind of beginning. She called the waiting her first novitiate, and practiced trust like a daily exercise. She returned to teaching with deeper resolve. Between lessons she visited the sick, gathered children for hymns, and kept a small ledger of needs she prayed over at night. Neighbors said she seemed to live halfway between earth and heaven. Feet dusty from the road, face bright from the chapel. A missionary heart had already started its route without a passport. When the House of Providence in Codogno asked for help with orphans, she accepted. There she managed with firmness and tenderness. Clean rooms, warm soup, hopeful rules. When the institution faltered amid internal storms, she held steady, prayed first, and acted next. Her calm drew the eye of Bishop Domenico Maria Gelmini of Crema, often rendered Cremona in popular tellings, who recognized leadership wrapped in gentleness. He urged her to found, not simply to join, to build the community that had refused her a decade earlier, but under a new name and a wider mission. Rejection had become redirection. The door that closed pushed her toward another she had not imagined. Next came a small house, a handful of women, and a name that carried fire: Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. The idea began like a whisper and turned into a house with bare walls. In 1880 at Codogno, she gathered a few women who wanted to love as widely as the Sacred Heart loved, teaching, nursing, and finding the forgotten. They called themselves the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Poverty was their furniture, joy their light. Francesca signed her name differently now, Frances Xavier Cabrini, borrowing zeal from the great Jesuit who had crossed Asia. "Let us love without measure," she told her sisters, and then proved it by opening a school, an orphanage, and a tiny ward for the sick, all on faith and borrowed coins. Providence kept arriving just after the last loaf was shared. Grace multiplied in practical ways. By 1888, Rome approved the congregation. Their small dream had been recognized as a family with a mission. Her own dream, however, pointed east. She prayed for China, for villages she could see only in her heart. When she placed the plan before Pope Leo XIII, he smiled with a father's clarity and changed her compass. Not to the east, but to the west. The west meant ships packed with Italian migrants, tenements stacked like crates, and children who learned hunger before letters. Obedience redrew her map in a single afternoon. She bowed, booked passage, and told her sisters that God's will often arrived as a change of direction. Courage, she said, was simply trust on a schedule. In spring 1889, she sailed with 6 sisters toward New York, seasick, prayerful, steady. They carried rosaries, a few lire, and letters of introduction. But the arrangements that were promised had fallen through. No house waited. No one met them at the pier. Only the harbor wind and the noise of a city that did not know their names. So they did the most Cabrini thing possible. They knelt on the dock and thanked God first. Word of their plight reached Archbishop Michael Corrigan, who found them shelter. From that small mercy, roots took hold. Within months they opened a school, then an orphanage, and the West began to feel like assignment rather than exile. What obedience started, love accelerated. Next came grim stairwells, crowded wards, and the first hospital that skeptics said could never open. She answered doubt with work, and the work kept winning. The tenements had smelled of coal dust and soup lines, but she walked them like parish aisles. From New York to Chicago, New Orleans, Denver, and Los Angeles, she traced a map of need and wrote schools and hospitals over it in courage. People called her Mother long before any plaque used her name. She answered with a nod and went back to work. In 1892, when doctors doubted her plan for a hospital, no funding, no staff, no chance, she answered with the sentence that kept showing up in her life: "If it is God's will, His providence will supply." Soon the doors of Columbus Hospital opened, and the poor entered first. The sisters turned hallways into mercy and wards into classrooms of hope. Charity became their medicine. Organization became its dosage. Her schools sounded like hymns at recess. Children who had arrived silent learned letters and dignity together. Catechism paired with arithmetic. Kindness sat at every desk. She told her teachers, "Form hearts, not only minds." And the lesson plan never expired. Insults came cheap because they were women, because they were foreign, because they prayed while they worked. She answered scorn with steadiness. When money ran thin, she sewed. When food ran out, she begged with a smile. When permission stalled, she showed results. Her perseverance preached louder than any sermon in the neighborhood. At night she knelt in chapel, shoulders slumped from miles but eyes bright. She left lists at the tabernacle. Names of children, patients, widows, men who drank too much, foremen who hired too little. By morning, she carried those lists like marching orders and emptied another day on the altar of service. The title Mother of the Immigrants had not been crafted. It had been overheard on stairwells and in bakeries when strangers spoke of the nun who found lost boys' work and sick mothers' medicine. Her presence turned crowded streets into parishes and city blocks into a moving congregation. And each success simply widened her horizon. Administrators had expected sentiment. They met a strategist. She built boards, trained staff, balanced ledgers, and insisted that beauty belonged to the poor. Clean linens, flowers by statues, sunlight where fear once lived. Results kept arriving. Healed bodies, steady families, children who stopped flinching at the sound of doors. She had started as a teacher with a fragile chest. Now she moved like a small weather system, quiet, constant, life-giving, over a country that learned to breathe easier where she stopped. Next came citizenship, a passport stamped by Providence, and a network that stretched past train timetables into prayer that never slept. By the new century, her small congregation had stretched like dawn. Italy to Spain, France, England, Brazil, and the Americas. More than 60 houses lighting up maps that once felt cold. She traveled with a vial of medicine in her bag and a crucifix in her pocket. Ships, trains, and wagons had become her moving chapels. Stewards saw a fragile nun. Stations saw a general of mercy. Growth demanded bones, so she built them. She wrote clear rules that kept hearts free and houses united. Obedience without strangling initiative, charity without losing order. Her letters arrived everywhere like warm directives. Pray first, then act. Keep books honest. Keep rooms clean. Keep tempers kinder than the weather. Every new work began the same way, silence before the tabernacle. She believed that action without prayer turned noisy, but prayer joined to work sounded like music. At night, she asked her sisters to cover the hours with Eucharistic adoration so daytime courage had a night shift. Hospitals learned her rhythm. Receive the poor first, treat with skill and tenderness, measure what matters, and make beauty part of healing. Fresh linens, sunlight, flowers in tin cups. Schools learned it too. Formation of hearts alongside lessons. Discipline braided with joy, a dignity you could feel in hallways. Visitors left wondering why holiness felt so practical. Stories traveled faster than trains. Recoveries that came after desperate prayers. Sailors who thanked her for calm seas. Families who swore an unseen hand had helped. Reports claimed wonders. The church would test some and keep others as devotion. She only pointed upward and moved to the next task. For her, the headlines stayed the same. Love had work to do. She kept the sisters close in spirit, though oceans lay between them. When quarrels sparked, her letters poured water. When fatigue stacked up, she sent humor and a 3-line plan. When fear rose, she signed simply, Coraggio, courage. And houses that had felt alone started breathing in unison again. Her heart had stayed weak and her schedule fierce, yet her smile kept announcing that the Sacred Heart never tired. She liked to say, when we cannot run, we walk. When we cannot walk, we crawl. But we never stop loving. And the world kept opening doors to a woman who knocked softly and did not leave. Her map kept widening, but her body kept asking for mercy. She settled much of her work from Chicago, where hospitals and schools breathed like twin lungs of the same heart. From dawn to dusk, she moved softly, checking beds, greeting children by name, and leaving short notes that read like blessings. Doctors had told her to rest. She smiled and answered with smaller steps, not fewer. Each morning she received the Eucharist, then let the day spend her. Meetings, letters, a staircase of interruptions she climbed like prayer. At night, sisters often found her kneeling, whispering lists of people who had no one else. Advent 1917 arrived on brittle air. In the kitchen she rolled Christmas candies for the orphans, hands trembling, eyes bright. Love, she said, is the sweetest gift we can give. The sisters remembered how she laughed when the sugar clumped and how quickly she returned to the chapel to finish thanking God for it. On December 22, 1917, snow sifted over the city like quiet absolution. She lay in a small room at Columbus Hospital, the house she had built for other people's pain. Prayers braided the hallway. The sisters gathered. The room thinned to silence. She had crossed oceans more times than anyone thought wise. Now she crossed the last gently. There were no speeches, only a whispered hymn and the steady reverence of women who had learned courage from a very small teacher. The world outside kept moving. Inside, Charity exhaled and left a fragrance that felt like home. At her death, foundations stretched across 3 continents. Schools, hospitals, orphanages, and chapels planted like lamps where streets had stayed dark. She had not built an empire. She had built a family, and families remember how to continue. Chicago snow kept falling. The mission kept breathing. After her death, stories traveled faster than trains. Families spoke of sudden recoveries. Sailors thanked her after hard seas. Neighborhoods said a mother still walked their streets. Reports claimed healings through her intercession. The church tested some and held others as devotion. Even the claim that her body had remained incorrupt was told with awe. Later expositions used protective techniques around relics, so the faithful kept the mystery with reverence and care. In 1938, Pope Pius XI declared her blessed. The church had recognized what the poor already knew. On July 7, 1946, Pope Pius XII canonized her a saint. For years later, in 1950, he named her patron of immigrants. A tiny woman who once feared the ocean had become the steady star for people who crossed it. Shrines rose like thank you notes: New York, Chicago, Golden, Colorado, places where workers lit candles and mothers exhaled. Her name marked schools, hospitals, and homes on 3 continents. The sisters kept her rhythm. Pray first, act next, keep rooms clean, keep hearts kinder than the weather. What she began in Codogno had kept expanding, not as an empire but as a family. She had liked to say, "Nothing is impossible with the love of the Sacred Heart of Jesus." For those who doubted, she had offered no argument, only example. Weakness turned into mission. Fear turned into crossings. Rejection turned into a door opened for others. If you had ever felt too small for the road ahead, her life had already answered you. Begin and keep beginning. Before we close, type "Love has no borders" in the comments. Like the video, subscribe for daily saints, and share the story with someone far from home. And the flame she carried, the heart she trusted, kept traveling past the last frame. Saint Francis Xavier Cabrini, pray for us.